Now think of country music and you might think of slide guitars or cowboy hats, but you're probably thinking of a white singer. In the history of country music, there have been only 8 black women who've got on the country music charts. That 8 has now become 9 with Beyonce's new album, Cowboy Carter. It's been favourably reviewed by Rod Liddle in this magazine. He joins me now, as does Ricky Ross, the Deacon Blue frontman and presenter of Another Country, the BBC radio show on country music and Americana. Now, Ricky, let's start with you. You've been playing the music of country musicians and interviewing country musicians for quite some time now, and it goes without saying that the genre tends to be white artists. Now, Beyonce says her new album was born out of an experience she had years ago where, in her words, she did not feel welcome. Now, we assume that she's referring to her cameo at the 2016 Country Awards, where she did a duet with the Dixie Chicks, which went down controversially, shall we say, amongst some fans. Some of them walked out. Anyway, so she describes this album as her attempt to kind of break into a genre where she felt some kind of resistance. Now, having interviewed and spoken to so many country musicians, what's your feeling about the link then between country music and culture? Is this fundamentally a white person's music?
Well, it's really interesting you should ask, because and I'm just counting back now, October 21, someone at BBC in Scotland said, look, let's celebrate Black History Month, and can all programmes kind of come on board? And I remember my producer saying, what are we going to do? And I said, well, let's have a think about this. And we actually have a 2-hour show, and we played African-American artists for 2 hours. And all of them were ones that we either have played before or would be playing quite a lot of in the future, and all of whom were doing really interesting things. And they would say, and I think Beyonce would say, they are, taking back some of the music that they brought in the first place. That obviously has crossed over in a lot of ways. And so, as you rightly say, there haven't been many Black artists, certainly Black women, on the chart. I mean, one of the other things that we've highlighted on the show that's been interesting is talking to many country artists, singers, is that country radio, not only does it not maybe sometimes play Black artists, which you can understand, but also plays very few women. That's one of the other really weird things about it, given that there are so many creative country artists who are women and who are great songwriters, great singers. So there are problems within country music that are there. And I think sort of Beyonce is sort of, I suppose, answering some of these things. I'm not quite sure if I'm answering your question, but I think she belongs. And I think it's interesting. But clearly, if you listen to the album, it's not just a country album. As she says very rightly, it's a Beyonce album.
Right. Now, Rod, you say in your review that Beyonce is a Texas girl. She basically competed in rodeos when she was younger. Do you think she's trying to make a point with this album, or is it just good music?
Yes, I think she is, and I'm not sure the point is as valuable as the album. I mean, Ricky's right. There have always been a limited number of Black performers in country music, and probably more than we should really be aware of. And part of that is down to the fact that as Ricky rightly says, the country music institution in the US has always been very conservative, and all of my favourite country artists have been people from beyond that. So the outlaw country music of the 1960s and 70s with Waylon Willie and David Allan Coe to a degree, though there are problems with him as well, but particularly Guy Clark. But of course, I mean, just like rock and roll, country music is a hybrid of you Scots and Irish, and with a huge blues influence as well. I mean, bluegrass is exactly what it says. It may be a pun on the bluegrass you have in Kentucky, but it's also a form of country music which derives directly from Black blues music of the Mississippi Delta. So it's always been there. And Rick is absolutely right, and you're absolutely right. The country music stations, particularly, don't play it very much. I mean, one of the interesting things with the Beyonce album is that while she does play quite a lot of country music, what she doesn't do is play the form of country music which is very ochre on American radio, but also to us. She doesn't sound like the Eagles. There's no country rock there. This kind of bastard hybrid which came out, at the end of the 60s with some very good bands actually at the time, but which grew into this behemoth of blandness, which sort of railroaded its way through the 70s. The other thing, just quickly, is to say that in a way, Beyonce is giving back, because a rather large number of white country musicians, and Ricky will know this, people like Sturgill Simpson, have been plundering hip hop and black beats for the last 10 years, and bringing that into country music. And Miley Cyrus has done the same thing, originally a country artist.
Ricky, when the country music stations were explaining why they didn't want to play some of Beyonce's earlier music, they were saying, well, it's not proper country, which begs the question, what is proper country? It's sometimes said that country music, one definition I heard is that it's 3 chords and the truth. But I guess thematically, what truth is it? I mean, you could say, listening to it, that is, I don't know, life is hard, God is real, whiskey helps. Those are the truths which you tend to hear in country music, but also there tends to be a bit of nostalgia, like the past is better than the present. Now, perhaps that is the point of departure for the demographics of America.
It's interesting. I'm just having a weekend reflecting. A few weeks ago at Country to Country, did lots of interviews with the artists that were playing Country to Country, and more than once someone said to me, "That's my truth," which is kind of a modern cliche, which amuses me greatly. The thing about that great quote, of course, is by Harlan Howard, the great songwriter, and that 3 chords and the truth hangs above the Country Music Hall of Fame, one of the great places in Nashville you need to go if you ever go there. What defines country music is interesting, and fun is, an artist said this to me recently. Sometimes it's to do with the lyric. It's definitely to do with the lyric more than it is to do with the sound of the song. And I think where lyrics go, I mean, one of the things that draws me towards wanting to be able to write a country song is the times when I've just almost stopped the car and thought, wish I could have written that, I wish I could have said that, because it sums it up so beautifully. But musically now, it's so diverse. And Rod's absolutely right. Hip hop has come into it hugely. But what does amuse me, if we go back to the subject that we're meant to be talking about, which is about Beyonce, is that if you're going to get critical of Beyonce for not sounding country, then I challenge you to listen to a country music station, a satellite station or an online station. Someone who maybe, take a music lover who doesn't think they love country music, because it won't sound like the country music they remember. I mean, Rod was talking to people like Guy Clark and Waylon Jennings and so on. It won't sound like that. It will sound like modern pop music. And if you put some of the tracks that you'll hear on a modern country radio station beside some of the things that you're going to hear on Radio 2, you'll be struggling to hear the difference, really.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And you could even make the case, because country music, and particularly the old Opry and Nashville, the country music it's always championed is something. The term was coined, I think, in the early 60s, countrypolitan. So it was artists such as Lynn Anderson with "I Beg Your Pardon, I Never Promised You a Rose," which is a good song, but later Crystal Gale. This is very well produced. It doesn't frighten anybody. It's not Townes Van Zandt. You could well argue that Beyonce is more authentic to the actual feel of country music and to the origins of country music than countrypolitan is, which has become a rather. I mean, it's in the charts at the moment. Shania Twain is countrypolitan, basically, or was, and it's rather more rootsy than that. And I think that's interesting. And great to see.
But Ricky, there has been, over the years, we know there's been a link between race and music. And one of Deacon Blue's first songs, Fergus Sings the Blues, is fundamentally asking whether a guy called Fergus, can this white man sing the blues? That's the refrain. I've always wondered if there's something autobiographical about that. You are a big blues fan yourself. Did you feel starting out that in a way there were sort of areas of music that you'd struggle to be taken seriously, and that there is an extent to which musicians are kind of cast from an early age by what they look like, where they're from?
It's interesting. I mean, you're from the north of Scotland, Fraser. You'll know this. A sense in which you have imposter syndrome about anything that you do. I think sometimes when you're from Scotland, you feel like I didn't really know how to get into the music business. The only person that I knew that had ever had a record deal in Dundee, where I grew up, was a guy called Michael Mara. And Michael wrote this great iconic song called Gale's Blue, which it was about a guy coming down from the Highlands wanting to be a rock and roll or a blues artist or an R&B artist. And that sort of inspired Fergus Sings the Blues, because I never have an original idea in my head. I've always got to borrow. I'm like Bob Dylan. I need to borrow extensively. But
Everybody does.
But everyone does. I think that's true. But I think there is this thing about being an imposter, and I think that the question is always there. And I think if you don't have that feeling, if you don't have the feeling of being an outsider, then it takes something away, because I think that's part of the joy. I think it's elbowing your way into a world that you have loved. I mean, we have all grown up loving pop music, loving the mystery of it. And suddenly when you're on top of the pops or whatever it is that you're hoping to hear, maybe you hear your record on the radio, suddenly to belong there, to belong in that company is the dream, isn't it? If your record's sandwiched between two of your favorite artists on the radio, you just think, I've made it.
And Rod, I wonder, I mean, in Britain, we didn't have things like country music charts, not in the same way. We tend not to think of segregate music in that way.
Very, very good point. Especially as Ricky's such a lover of country music and tries to write country songs, we've given very little to country music, aside maybe from most of its origins. And that was largely, as I say, Scotland and Ireland, and the Scottish and Irish immigrants in the Appalachians and beyond, who gave that first great burst of what became country music, I guess through folk. I guess through the original folk music. And I used to wonder why there weren't more Scottish country bands. And I was chided by this by my great friend, Rab Noakes, bless him, when he was alive, who made what I think is the greatest British country album, Red Pump Special, back in 1973.
Well said, Rod.
A really lovely album.
A lovely man. And of course, Rab was
a really lovely man, yeah.
Rab was responsible for the radio show that came before our radio show. So we sort of, we're sitting on Rab's shoulders, as it were. So very much, absolutely. He went over to Nashville. First Scottish person that went over to Nashville to record that, right? To record at that time as well.
Really, really beautiful album. And it sounded the part. I mean, partly because it was done in Nashville with Nashville production, but partly also because Rab's a very good songwriter, an underrated one. But he did chide me about saying, why don't Scottish bands play country music more often? Why aren't there more Scottish country bands? He said, no, it's an American phenomenon. It's not really us, And he felt an imposter, just as Ricky was talking about feeling an imposter. Treading into that territory.
But Scotland has got folk music, hasn't it, Ricky?
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, that's a difference. That has tended to be our equivalent when you look at, again, the demographics, the bonding with home, if you like. It's tended to be the traditional music that Scotland has exported to Canada, Spain, and the rest of the world.
Yes, it has. I think there's something significantly different about, I mean, listen, folk music probably, yes, in the 50s, 60s maybe was this. I think the key to country music understanding it is, I think it's still a people's music. I still think that there's something about the fact that the ordinary Joe, whether he be male, female, black or white, whatever, I think there's still something about it being the people's music. And sort of because it keeps that framework of 3 minutes, in the 60s, it was probably 2 minutes of a song. But within that, it's telling stories, the great stories. Rodney Crowell would say you have to love a ghost story, but there are stories essentially within these little 3 minute windows that they create. And I think that people's music and the fact that it's still popular music, whereas folk music has become, because of the nature of it, it's become more esoteric, I think as well. But I think country music is popular. It's popular music that's from the South. And if you grew up in the South, if you're from Alabama, you might become Jason Isbell, or if you're Mississippi, you might become Marty Stewart. That's your music that you grew up with. And it's not like a choice. It's not like I'm going to be a country musician. It's just that someone hands you a mandolin and off you go, because that's the music that you know.
Yes, Isbell certainly didn't think it was a choice. He felt he had no option but to play this music. I was just thinking about the Scottish input. I suppose Stealers Wheel were a kind of country band. Certainly Jerry Rappert, actually more Joe Egan in a way. Were a kind of country band put together as being by record companies as being Britain's answer to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And great musicians and some lovely songs there. But I agree with Rick generally on that. That yes, it's I hate to bring class into it, but it is a kind of working class music.
And we shouldn't overlook the Proclaimers, Fraser and Rod, as well, because the
Proclaimers,
Proclaimers are in that tradition. They absolutely love Merle Haggard, and beautifully, their daughter, one of their daughters, Roseanne Reid, who's making a fine country tradition, went to Steve Earle Writing School and is playing gigs, and we've supported her on the show. So the tradition goes on.
The tradition goes on, and Ricky Ross's show Another Country can be heard on the iPlayer, and Rod Liddle's unmissable music review column in The Spectator. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining me.